Uh-oh. I'm already having a problem. I was able to move
Yeah,
this.
hit the little arrow. Yeah.
Maybe this one arrow will do it.
Yep.
All right. So we'll get started. If this will work. Okay. We're talking, I'm gonna hit the OK button. We're talking about the Clean Water Act. And we months ago, we talked about the structure of the Clean Water Act and the objective of the Clean Water Act being to restore and maintain integrity, chemical, physical, and biological integrity. What's integrity mean? It means that waters are like they ought to be. If I say such and such is a person of integrity, that means they're like they ought to be, and that's what it means when we're talking about waters. Now, we do not have an integrity meter. We have to decide on some properties of water that we can measure and to see if those waters are as they should be. Oh my gosh, this is going to be bad. So here we are. How do we determine what the goal is and whether we're there, and if we're not there, how we're going to get there? How do we measure water? What's a passing grade on that measurement? How does the Clean Water Act expect us to fix problems where we don't have a passing grade? And then this total maximum daily load, TMDL, where did that come from? Title III in the Clean Water Act is the heart of the Clean Water Act. The other titles are important, but they're helper parts of the act. The main part of the act is standards and enforcement. When I look at the word standard and enforcement, I pronounce it this way: what do we want and how will we get it? And that's what Title III does for us. Title III is this. Here's the legal citation. Section 1313. The act requires each state to establish standards for all bodies of water. Now we've mentioned that earlier in our classes. But so setting water quality standards, setting goals for water is a requirement of the statute. Not NPDES is something that states can be requested to be delegated or authorized to administer the NPDES part of the act, and they can do it. That's not the way it works with water quality standards. Water quality standards, states are assigned, they're required to come up with water quality standards. Now, if they come up with if they don't come up with reasonable standards, with standards that are consistent with the statute, or if they simply fail to come up with standards altogether, the EPA will promulgate standards. That doesn't happen very often, but it does happen that states will, for one reason or another, have a water quality standard that's outside the bounds. Tennessee is at one point selenium standard. EPA, the best science in the EPA decided that selenium, the national warning level on selenium, needed to be lower. Well, there was an industry in Tennessee that said, "Hey, wait a minute, we could be in non-compliance if the selenium standard went down." They had a lot of power in the General Assembly and came within one vote in Tennessee Senate of taking that selenium standard away from us and leaving it where the old standard was. And we told them, look here, if you do that, EPA under the statute will be required to come in and impose a standard for selenium. EPA has a website of the places in the country where they have promulgated standards. And they've promulgated them in a few cases for states where the state simply wasn't able, the politics wouldn't let the state promulgate the standard. and they've also promulgated them for Indian tribes, which they're, in those cases, they're the lead agency. Wait, can I get this sidebar off of here? I do not see how to do it. There I go. Is that better?
I think so.
Okay, so let's go down here. Okay, so states are required to review their water quality standards every 3 years, and it's called a triennial review. They're required to do that through a process that involves public comment and opportunity for hearings. So that's once every 3 years. Every 2 years, their states are required to assess waters and to report the condition of their waters. The statute was passed in 1972, and so every 2 years means the same as every even number year. For impairments that are caused by pollutants, states are to set priorities for TMDLs and generate those TMDLs through public participation process. So caused by pollutants are all impairments caused by pollutants. Does anybody have an opinion? Well, no, here's an impaired water body. This water body does not have a balanced and indigenous population of aquatic life. And of course, the reason it doesn't is because it's being channelized, and it's in violation of this state standard for temperature and for oxygen and for nutrients. There are 3 parts. I'm seeing a hand raised there. Nancy, if you want to, if people have questions, just button.
Yeah, back to the last canal or whatever that was. This we see a lot in that the Army Corps of Engineers has done in Northern California is and it comes and goes. It's connected to the bay in San Francisco. And there have been movements to try and get rid of it, but it has happened. So does that contribute to the problems?
Yeah. And that would be, depending on what state you're in. This is an impaired water body. Some states choose not to list their channelized streams as impaired. Okay. There are 3 parts of water quality standards. What do we want to use the water for? How clean does it have to be usable for that purpose? And something called the anti-degradation policy. And anti-degradation is kind of a difficult word. There are 2 negatives in it. Anti-degrade, it's kind of a depressing word, but it's a good policy. We'll take a look at it. Okay, this is Tennessee's water quality standards. If you were just to Google Tennessee space water space quality space standards, a page like this would pop up. And I've done this for so many states that I know that in most cases I can just put in the name of the state, water quality standards, and something will appear on my screen. Sometimes you have to fish around for it in order to put those 3 parts together. Sometimes it's easier. But this is how it looks in Tennessee. There are 2 different chapters that the standards are in. This 03 chapter has water quality criteria, and it also has our anti-degradation statement. The 04 chapter has stream uses. So this is the first part, uses that Tennessee recognizes. And they're the ones on this list. And so almost every water in Tennessee is classified for fish and aquatic life, for recreation, for livestock watering and wildlife, and for irrigation. Larger waters are classified also for domestic water supply, industrial water supply. Cool water mountain streams may be classified in addition to any of those as trout streams or naturally reproducing trout streams. Now, some states, their list will be as long as ours, some states, the list will be 3 times as long because they'll be very specialized in the uses that they want to protect and for which they've developed criteria. Waters are almost always classified for multiple uses. And when they are, the applicable criteria will be the one that is most protective. And so for aquatic life, temperature is often the most protective of criteria. In Tennessee, our fish and aquatic life temperature criteria is 30.5 centigrade. And for trout, it is that number is lower. And it's important if we want to keep trout or more regular aquatic life alive. But from standpoint of drinking water, agriculture, you know what, it doesn't really matter what the ambient temperature was, because by the time it gets through in drinking water, its temperature is normalized. This is what our uses look like. I've talked about this already, but the most protective uses are going to be water supply, fish and aquatic life, and recreation. Somewhere on that list, no matter what your parameter is going to be the most protective. So recreation criteria would cover, like E. coli or coliform bacteria would be one. It's more important for that to be met in a recreational stream than for fish and aquatic life. Really don't care about human bacteria. Domestic water supply, waters are disinfected, so they have more resilience. Trout, not so much. Ammonia, the ammonia parameter is very important in fish and aquatic life. Not so much in the other uses. Criteria is the second part of water quality standards. How clean does water have to be to support each of its classified uses? And what we do there is we go ask science, and we say, look here, science, we want to use water for recreation, or we want to use it for fish and aquatic life, or we want to use it for domestic water supply. Tell us in measurable properties if you can, but in narrative properties if that becomes necessary. Give us a clue. Tell us what we're looking for in order for science to support, for science to verify that water is supportive of its classified use. So here's Tennessee's criteria for domestic water supply. This is just one of the uses, and you'll see some numbers here. I've highlighted lead because I'm going to come to it here in just a minute. But Tennessee doesn't have its own separate science, different from North Carolina has, or different than Illinois has. Generally, we all use EPA standard or criteria. California, in some cases, does have its own idea of what constitutes clean, but most of the other states do not. These numbers these are small numbers. They're written in parts per billion. And over here on the right, we have 2378 tetrachlorodibenzoparadioxin. And that number is just super small. It's usually written in parts per trillion. And it would look more normal if it were. Science is getting better. I'm an old guy. I've been in this business for a long time. When I got to be director of the state program in Tennessee, was over here all the way to the left of this chart. At that time, we knew that we needed a certain a number lower than 10 in order to protect fish and aquatic life. And the way we do that is you're able to synthesize a concentration by pouring distilled water in with a known and measurable amount. You can make a container with a known lead concentration that's below what's measurable. But look what's happened over the time that I served with the agency. Now you can measure just a smidge of lead, and so as time goes on, water quality criteria are improving. We're not adding and subtracting uses so much as we are changing criteria or adding criteria. We've got new chemicals that we're regulating, things that that weren't on our radar, that we didn't think about, we didn't know about, we weren't concerned about back when I started my career with the agency.
When you had this so much lead in the water in 1992, what was the cause of that, and what legislation was taken that really
This is detection limits. This isn't how much lead there was, but there was lead in water. This chart is how much did you have to have in order for science to find it in water?
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
This is detection limit, right? But good question. Lead is particularly important. What was I heard yesterday that the president has identified getting lead out of the water as a national priority.
Yeah.
And then we have the situation in Michigan.
Okay.
Microplastics. Whoever heard of microplastics 10 years ago? And now we're concerned about it, and we keep up, and we're looking to protect ourselves. Forever plastics. We've all seen the movie, what was it, Dark Water. We're concerned about the chemicals that we were really happy to have because they helped us put out fires or keep rain from penetrating our raincoats. We even put it on dental floss. But now we're concerned about PFAS, and we're concerned about it getting into the biosolids or the sludge that we produce in our wastewater plants. And then we're worried if we put it on agricultural fields, it'll work its way into our food supply. Okay, here's the third part of water quality standards called anti-degradation. And the sense of anti-degradation is we want things to get better instead of worse. And so what it says is we're not to authorize meaning grant a permit to degradation of waters unless there's a public interest involved. Clean water is a public good, and government doesn't give it up without there being a reason for the public to do that. And you've probably seen this anti-degradation in tiers, anti-degradation support level in tiers. And that is if where we have a use that's just exactly being supported, but the water's no better than what it takes to support that use, we call tier 1. And we say, if you're authorizing a discharge to tier 1, you have to maintain existing quality and existing uses. That's not usually the case. The more common case is where your present condition in water is something better than the minimum necessary to support the classified uses. And we can authorize a degradation provided that it's in the public interest. Some states use this tier 2.5. In my state, what it means is for special waters, we call exceptional Tennessee waters. If it's in a public park, it's a state park, federal park, there's any species, we add more public participation to that process. And in ONRW, some states will put the initial of the state instead of an O, like Tennessee Natural Resource Waters, although we don't do that. And that says they're not to be degraded at all. Some waters are so important, like in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, Tennessee says all the waters in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park we're going to allow zero degradation. So that's it for 3 parts of water quality standards. Any questions about that? All right. When you Google up water quality standards for your state, you're probably going to work your way into how that state organizes its water programs to protect waters. And most states now that I'm familiar with are using some variation of this watershed management approach. Now, this is Tennessee explaining its watershed management approach. And I implemented that in the state in 1996, a long time ago. But here's what it looks like. There are 54 major watersheds in this state. We share some of them with our border states. Tennessee shares more water with its neighbor states than any other state in the country. We've got water going back and forth with every state that surrounds us. But what this says is we're going to divide the state into management groups that are based on watersheds. And the reason that it's done on a 5-year rotation is because that matches the NPDES permit term limit that's set out in the Clean Water Act. So every 5 years, we know we're going to be at issuing permits. So what we did was we divided the rest of the activities into 4 more parts. And so you can see them on this circle. What are we doing on those other 4 years? And so the way that it works is this way. And I'll show you. Right now, I'm sitting right where I'm here. Spear Point is pointing. I'm in the Old Hickory Lake watershed of Tennessee, north central part of the state. And he's on the right. That could have been a little bit bigger, but I think my color vision is good enough to say I am in group 4 of Tennessee's watershed rotation. So here's the way that goes. I can tell because I'm in group 4, and this is a little bit confusing until you realize years start at whole years or half years. So every 6 months something's moving on this chart, which is why some of the blocks are bigger than others. But I can tell that in year 2024, I was supposed to have 6 months of TMDL and planning. And then I've got a whole year of permit drafting and issuance, and I'm coming up towards monitoring after that. So monitoring is kind of at the beginning of the cycle. We're big on getting people involved in monitoring, and we states are different on it, and their personalities are different on it. And so if the personality in your state, whoever's deciding who's going to do monitoring, I mean, I always suggest to citizen groups that they help out the state. States can't get all their water monitored. They just don't have the horsepower to do it. And so I suggest to regulated stormwater communities that they volunteer to help their state. Universities help their state. High schools, if they've got students that are trained on the science of collecting samples to go help them. And there's no reason why Sierra or other clubs can't just say, what would you like help on? We understand that we would have to be trained to help you. And we understand that there are rules, but we'd like to be part of it. Okay. Assessment. We use the monitoring data that we get and the standards that we've set to say how waters are doing. there's a clip out of our reading assignment. It says section 305B requires states to, every 2 years, tell Congress how the waters are doing. This is my state's 305B report. And this is at the beginning of it. It says this report contains information about our waters, how we decided that, where the pollution's coming from, and where we've posted waters for against body contact. And this slide out, this comes out of my state's 305B report that just went in this year. It says water bodies are assessed by the data that we've got and the standards that we've set. We use our data, meaning the agency's data, but we also use other sources. Whatever, if other source data is valid and persuasive, then they're required to. The states are required to use that data in making their assessment. Since I was out of the agency, I got one stream assessed as non-supportive, and I did that with photographs. High school buddy had a stream going across his property that's below a wastewater treatment plant in an agricultural area, and it's changed over the time that he's had on the property, and it's hyperneutrophied, it's eutrophic, and I said, we need that stream assessed as non-supportive. I took pictures. They sent a biologist out and said, yeah, that's what it looks like, and that's now assessed as impaired. Once we've decided whether use support whether uses are being supportive, then we put the water body into one of five categories. There's a chart in our reading assignment that does that, but I like this one better. It says there are 5 categories. If you look here, it kind of looks like there are 9, but we'll take a look at them. Category 1, and that's where you'd like for waters to be, it says, we know enough to say that all designated uses in this water body are supported. None of them are threatened. And so that goes in category 1. Category 2 says, we know enough to say that some of the uses are supportive. We don't know about some uses. So that might be, we might say that we've done bacteria sampling and we've got an idea that recreation is supported here. We have not done heavy metals or organics. So we're not going to make a statement about whether the domestic water supply use is supportive. Category 3, we don't know for that water body. We just don't have the data, or the data's out of date. So we are going to say, for example, that where we have data that's over 5 years, we call that equivalent to not having data. We're not going to assess water on conditions that we measured over 5 years ago. And that can come and go. I mean, that time period might be different for different parameters. But at some point, we're going to say, no, that's too old. Bacteria that we sampled 10 years ago, it didn't have bacteria, but we've had a lot of development. We're not going to consider that data tells us what we would find out there now. Category 4 is there is a condition of non-support, but we don't need a TMDL. And there are 3 ways that can happen. We've already done the TMDL. We've got some other good idea, or the impairment is not caused by pollutant. And we've already seen the example of where it might be a category 4C. And then under category 5, category 5 is the 303D list. A TMDL is needed. And that's what category 5 looked like until fairly recently, when some people mounted a persuasive argument. You know what? A restoration plan may be a better idea than a TMDL. And I'll just leave it there. This I clipped out of our reading assignment. If the problem is flow, if a watershed is the streams are, if a stream is flowing less than it was, the flow has been decreased either by water withdrawals or by the way that development presented itself in the watershed. Low flow is decreased. If that's the problem, then it's in category 4C. The pollutant itself, whatever it is that we measured, if there was a pollutant discharge that now is not being diluted to the criteria level, then we could do a TMDL. It would be appropriate to do a TMDL for that pollutant, but flow would not be the pollutant of concern. So this is a picture out of Tennessee's 305B report. And you can see that for streams and rivers, about half of our streams were unassessed. And when we present this to people, they say, wait, why aren't you doing it all? In my experience, 50%, that's about as good as states do. You get on your state's 305B report. If you see a number significantly higher than that, tell me about it. States, it's just hard for states to get out there. And typically what the condition will be is that years or maybe decades ago, the states found monitoring locations that were below discharges of significance. And so we just set up to routinely go back to those monitoring locations that were below significant discharges. And where there are no discharges, where we're out in the rural area with no municipal or industrial discharges, we just haven't found the time to go out there and do assessments. So probably the unassessed waters have a higher support ratio than the assessed waters. It's a reasonable position to take. Lakes and reservoirs, much different. We consider that we've gotten on lakes, we have the water bodies tend to be bigger. And so we feel like we get a bigger bite with one assessment. And so we call more of our waters assessed when we're talking about lakes. Here you see that we've got almost half of our waters considered are assessed use supportive. Okay, I'm taking a break now. I'll come back to TMDL, but I want to just spend a second on how's my waterway. I can no longer see any faces, but shout out if you've ever been on how's my waterway. Are you familiar with it? Anybody?
No, not me.
I suggest that you get on this. Just if you put in how's my waterway, you can even leave out the apostrophe. How's my waterway? If you just Google that, a page like the one I'm going to show you is going to pop up. This is a program that EPA announced on October 18, 2012. What was important about that? We've already covered this in one of our classes. October 18, 1972 was what day? That's the day that the Clean Water Act passed. And so on the 40th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, EPA said, happy birthday, Clean Water Act. Here's a cool program that's going to help us manage waters. So how's my waterway? If you get on this thing and you punch in a zip code, and I didn't put a whole lot of slides here, but when you open it up, at the top of the page will be a blank, like a Google blank, and you can put in Chicago. You could put in the zip code that you're in. You could put in the water ID number if you knew it. And it would come up like this. So I put in 37138, which is I'm sitting inside the 37138 zip code. And here's what popped up on my screen. And you look over here to the right, and you see I didn't, this is before I turned on the water monitoring locations and the permitting discharges. And so you folks know how to operate this. You know that you can just take your cursor over to that and put your cursor on the little circle and just move it a little bit to the right, and it will turn on that layer, that GPS layer. So here's what it looks like when I do that. And so my house is, let me see, it's mine. Is my cursor showing up?
Yes.
My house is right here. And so I said, okay, what's the closest discharge to me on my side of the lake? And here it is right here. It's that diamond that's right there. So I push that diamond, and here's what pops up. That's the West Wilson Utility District water treatment plant. It's their filter backwash. That is a permitted discharge. And I mean, I can paddle my kayak down. I have paddled my kayak down to that water treatment plant many times. And so that's the water treatment plant there. And I can tell if it's impaired or not. I can tell whether the permit has been issued. And if I want to, I can jump from that to all this information about the permit, and then see the small type at the bottom, facility report. Punching that will bounce me out of how's my waterway. It will bounce me into ECHO, which is Enforcement and Compliance History Online. And so it will take me to this other database, and I can see that the filter backwash from West Wilson UD seems to be a pretty good actor in the environment. There have been there's been no enforcement, no violations. They're within their permit limits, and they're not having a problem. Any question about that? How's my waterway? I mean, here it is.
How often is it updated? Is that real time?
You know what? EPA doesn't have its own people in Tennessee that know the answers to this. The states give information to EPA, and EPA uploads it. And I have been out of government for 12 years. It might be now that states can upload directly into how's my waterway. I really don't know, but it would be, it's different from state to state, but if there was a violation, it would be on this page. This says, have there been any significant violations in the last 3 years? What inspections were done in the last 5 years? Yes, it's been inspected in the last 5 years. So it's updated. It's updated periodically. I mean, it's such a useful tool, and there's not a meter on it. We can all do it for free.
No, it's a great idea. It's just would be useful to know when the last update was, which probably maybe it's somewhere.
It may be in there.
Yeah.
I just was looking at the How's My Waterway for North Branch of Chicago River, which is what came up by me, and it was 2022. It does say in the little report, at least.
Good. Yeah, that's not bad. Not bad. 2022 is pretty good.
Paul, and for the rest of the group, one of the things that I used to do for US EPA was to evaluate 305B reports. And one of the problems that exist in Illinois is they had profound staff shortages. So the agency went from 1,200 staff down to 600 staff. as you take a look, there are significant problems in Illinois that relate to 305B and 303D assessment. So there does not exist a water quality criteria for nutrients in running water in Illinois. There is a wounded and problematic criteria for lakes in Illinois. The 305B report contains profound problems because the data has not been dated for their 305B report. So what you've got, at least here in Illinois, is very, very significant problems in terms of maintaining the data that needs to go into those water quality records.
Jim, what was your time period in that?
When I was at US EPA, that was quite a long time ago.
Roger Canerva, Jim Park?
Yes. About that time going back.
But
right?
not all the way up to Marshall Wilhite.
The name rings a bell, but it's been a long one.
Yeah,
It's been a long time. But the existing situation for Illinois is problematic, and it makes for significant problems for people to evaluate the meaning of water quality criteria and the like.
Yeah.
One of the things, if you would, could you comment on differences that you see in states relative to the application of tiered aquatic life uses? So not everybody agrees on what the uses of streams should look like and what the criteria should be as well. And I'll,
Jim, I'm really not I don't think I'm able to have a much value there. I know what we did. I have an idea. North Carolina's on the phone, so I have an idea of what North Carolina did. We borrowed some of their science. We have our own macroinvertebrate index, but we borrowed North Carolina's for a while because they have good science and they were ahead of us. I really don't know the answer. I mean, it's an important question. I'm sorry, I just missed it. What I come from the NPDES permit world before I was a field engineer beginning of my career, and then I was in charge of permits, and then I was director. But in terms of the biology, I mean, the biologists would take me out in the field with them and let me use the tweezers out of my Swiss Army knife. But I never really was good on taxa identification and knowing which ones were better water than others.
I think Doris has her hand raised.
Okay, great.
Doris?
Thank you. I have a question. This is going to be what you have said today will give me things to study about our problems in Oregon. I work especially on some creeks where it'll be good to see what's the closest discharge. I'm wondering about in Tennessee, where we have people doing testing for biosolids and water quality problems with PFAS in the water. Are you familiar with the Tennessee chapter's work on testing water for PFAS in where biosolids are applied?
Oh, I am. I'm a Sierra member. I gave Scott Banbury my 1997 Subaru.
So you can help them find where these contaminated water sources, what's the nearest discharger?
Yeah, I don't know if I would be much help, if I would be much help in that, but I can help be part of your discussion. What makes good public policy? What's going on nationwide. I married a Mainer, so I keep up. I know more about what's going on in Maine than I do in some states. And in Maine, they said, well, you can no longer apply municipal sludge to lands.
Right. Well, they're trying to do that in Tennessee. The Tennessee chapter has a really good report. And I just wondered if you knew about that work.
Mhm.
I have another question since I have a chance to ask it of you. We have a horrible problem in Oregon because when we try to get a, a TMDL established and acted on, the state says they have no money. There have been so many lawsuits against the state of Oregon's TMDL program for being out of date.
Mhm.
So we're trying to protect the watershed of the city of Corvallis, which a watershed is a drinking water source. And this is the state has us on a schedule that we have no idea if we'll get any action even next year because they say they have no money. So I just wondered if you heard about this problem where states have no money because they're spending all their time dealing with lawsuits against them for people being in violation.
TMDLs are assigned to states, but a TMDL can be initiated by somebody else. A citizen group can initiate a TMDL. A discharger can initiate a TMDL. If anybody that's got the science skills and the science.
Well, we're doing that. We're in line, and they say there's just no time to deal with our challenge because too many other people are doing this. But I am going to look at what I learned today about going on the EPA site and see if I can find anything to help them. Our chapter has protested this. One thing Oregon does is it turns over its TMDL management to the Department of Forestry, which is the main cause of the turbidity in our streams because of logging. And the Department of Forestry is very permissive. So I just like to point out that Oregon has a lot of problems, and I'm learning things today from you, Paul, and I thank you.
And so we of course think of Oregon as an environmentally progressive state. Oregon, Washington, California. I mean, compared to us, a lot of the states are environmentally progressive. I'm going to get back into TMDL so we can keep talking about this. Do you keep a stream on the list after the TMDL has been done? Well, the rule says, is a TMDL needed? And if it's already done, arguably it's not needed. So EPA policy is to allow them to come off the list. Other people say, no, the water's still impaired. It stays on the list until it's not impaired. And our tech, this is a clip out of our reading assignment. It said, there's much debate. Okay. The items on the list of impaired waters have to be prioritized. And that prioritization has some required considerations and some that are listed as may consider. Really, everything on this list ought to figure into priority ranking. And when the 303D list comes out, every item on that list says low, medium, or high. And there'll be a lot of lows on the list. a listing of impaired waters. This is an EPA slide. Listing states identify waters, and EPA wants to make a point. It's a state-driven process. States are the people who identify the waters, establish priorities, schedule, and come up with a plan. Then EPA has some time to review, approve, or disapprove the list by April 1. And in practice, here's what happens. In practice, there will be somebody at the regional office. There are 10 regions of the United States. Tennessee's in Region 4. Tennessee and North Carolina both in Region 4. The region will have somebody who's the minder on water quality standards, and that person will stay in touch with the state and will have an idea. So that person won't just get a 303D list and have 30 days to look at it. They will have talked that over with the state. They'll know what changes are coming in. They'll know what questions the state had that the state wanted to ask EPA's opinion. But if EPA develops a list, they have 30 days to, if EPA disapproves, they have 30 days to develop. I've never heard of EPA developing the list for the state. It may happen, I've never heard of it. Okay, so let's talk more about the TMDLs. What is a TMDL? It's a calculation of the maximum amount of pollutant and an allocation of that pollutant among the sources. What word is missing here? What word isn't showing up? TMD, what's the D? Daily. Daily. Why is the word daily not there? Well, the real question is, why was it ever there in the first place? And the reason, of course, was that the Clean Water Act was written in the late 60s, 1970, 1971, and passed in 1972. Back then, we were wonderfully ambitious, but hopelessly naive. And our thought was that pollution is important on a daily basis. It's like Weight Watchers. Every day you've got so many points, and you can eat that many points that day. Tomorrow's a new day. Well, that is not the way that water works. Day is unlikely to be the right period of interest. Temperature, if the water is too hot for 5 minutes, fish and aquatic life die. On an average, for the day, it might have been too cold, but that doesn't keep the fish and aquatic life alive. So instantaneous chlorine, if there's too much chlorine for a short period of time, you put your guppies in tap water, they're gone. On the other hand, the Gulf hypoxia, the Gulf really doesn't care how much nutrients it got on any particular day. It's the seasonal contribution of nutrients. It's how much it's rained during the agricultural seasons that's washed fertilizers into the Gulf. And so it's a seasonal allocation. And so daily is wrong, but we don't change it. And the reason we don't change it is people who know the Clean Water Act don't want to reopen it to fix things, because everybody's worried that if we reopen the act, things that don't need to be fixed will be changed. Okay, here's a Chesapeake example. Pollutants of concern that we're looking at in the TMDL. The condition that we're concerned with in Chesapeake is it's hypernutrified. It's overly it's loaded. It was too much nutrients. But we don't do a TMDL for nutrient. We do a TMDL for nitrogen and phosphorus. We go to the pollutants themselves that are causing the problem that we're concerned with. This I shot out of our reading assignments to remind ourselves of sources. The TMDL accounts for all sources. And this is an EPA slide. It says the TMDL is the sum of the regulated sources, the sum of the unregulated sources, and a margin of safety. But I'm going to show you a picture here that I'll argue makes that too simplistic. modeling, tool of modeling is a water quality model says, here's what we know about the relationship between pollutants in water and the conditions that we can measure. And so modeling is particularly important where you have contaminants that are not conservative in the aquatic environment. And so ammonia, temperature, oxygen, nutrients, you can't just determine how much there'll be in water using arithmetic, because the nutrients that were in the water at one point have been converted by the time the water gets someplace else. Streams have some capacity to reoxygenate themselves. So oxygen is coming into streams, and when you're doing models, you have to figure reaeration. Temperature, of course, dissipates as hot water that cools off. And so we use models to help us with that. And models can be a big point of disagreement. In Tennessee, there's a watershed group that says that the stream they're concerned with is being overloaded. And the municipality that discharges says, no, it's not. And it turns out the difference, they're both right if you use their version of the model. Okay, so here's the way the calculation goes. We saw this in our reading assignment, the term margin of safety. We don't want to, if an engineer is designing a staircase to hold a 300-pound person, the engineer will design it to hold a 600-pound person. We want to account for uncertainty. And here's what the allocation looks like. We've determined how much of a pollutant can be added to water, and now we've got to assign it a range. And there's more than, in this example, there's more than one point source. Those are regulated. And then there are some non-point sources. Those are unregulated sources. Urban runoff is a regulated point source, even though when you look at it, it says, well, that's really what I was thinking about for a point source, because the act was modified in 1987 to make urban runoff a regulated source. We call that a point source. So we give it a waste load allocation as opposed to just a load allocation. But then we've got we want to hold out some for the future. Are we through growing? No, we're not through growing, so we need some reserve capacity. We've got a natural background of a lot of pollutants. And so it's a common misconception that about TMDLs that EPA has rules on how allocation has to be done. That's not true. EPA's only rule is that it has to be rational. And so between two point source discharges, let's say a municipality and an industry, they both discharge oxygen demanding waste. However the state decides to do it, the state gets to do it that way, as long as it protects oxygen in that water. Is that clear?
Mm-hmm.
Reasonable assurance is the test. Reasonable assurance is if your allocation can be expected to work, that is, the municipality could get down to the lower level you've given them, the industry can get to the lower level you've given them, or the unregulated source can reasonably be expected to decrease its loading to that water body so that uses are eventually supported. However that happens is fine. But if you're saying, well, you know what, we don't want to trouble the municipality, we've got friends at that industry, we don't want to bother them, we're going to presume that we can get rid of 90% of the unregulated non-point source runoff. Okay, big shot. Let me see how you're going to get rid of that 90%. Well, we're optimists. That's not good enough. And so EPA won't allow that. All TMDLs have to go to EPA for approval, and EPA is going to make sure that the TMDLs not overly generous assumptions to non-point. And here's an example in Vermont. Vermont did a TMDL and they said, well, we're going to get a lot of reduction by encouraging landowners to control runoff from their sites. And EPA wrote and said, you know what, we just don't have that same level of confidence. We're going to make you redo that TMDL until you've assigned that out to regulated sources.
Hmm.
This is a clip out of our reading assignment. It says there's the ELI has done it's accumulated as a compendium of state laws to control non-point source. I tried to get on that, and here's what happened when I pushed that button.
Hmm.
Best I can tell, ELI no longer has that site available. Okay, TM implementation. This is our last subject. Implementation. TMDLs are not self-implementing, meaning just because a TMDL has been written, an industry who has received an assignment in that TMDL says, gosh, a TMDL has been written, I've got to get down to the assignment. No, the industry is controlled by its NPDES permit. Permits are controlled by the TMDL. Discharges are controlled by the permit. Implementation plans are not required by the Act. Some states require implementation plans. An implementation plan is a good idea to put in the TMDL. Tennessee puts an implementation plan in all of our TMDLs, and the citizens ought to demand it. It's not a requirement of the Act. This is out of our assigned reading. It says some states have stepped up to the plate by adopting rules required. We don't have a rule that requires it. We just are doing it by policy. MS4 is a regulated stormwater program. Most cities that have 1,000 or more people in a square mile are in MS4. Implementing TMDLs and the implementation plan for TMDLs in most MS4s is going to look like this. It's going to be narrative, all narrative. Comply with the permit, work on what you're doing to control things, report the results from time to time, and change your plan if you're not making any progress. There are some TMDLs that say explicitly, here's what you got to do. Chesapeake TMDL says, here's what we expect in terms of reduction for nitrogen and phosphorus. And it's extremely controversial. I mean, the Chesapeake gets better protection than a lot of the country does because there are not because there's anything fundamental about it, it's because a lot of people in the Chesapeake drainage and the Chesapeake water users want it improved. And so there are a lot of states that have part of the Chesapeake watershed. So New York might say, hey, wait a minute, our discharge flows a long way before it actually gets into the bay. And so we should be able to discharge a higher concentration of nutrients than a discharger who's going directly into the bay. And the dischargers going directly to the bay say, forget it, that's not fair. And so far, that's the way it's going. And the percentage reduction, to my knowledge, is the same wherever you are. Trading and offsets. The TMDL may say we need for a industry to reduce its loading of a pollutant by a certain amount. And the industry may say, you know what, here's how much that's going to cost us. Here is an agricultural operation that's not required to reduce loading, but could. What if we pay them to get the same amount of load reduction? The stream will be just as happy, and we will have done that for less expense. And the regulatory agency might then say, oh, that's okay with me, provided you give me some some overage, so I'll be sure that it's offset, so give me 20% over. And then also I want you to do a monitoring program to make sure that what you say you're gonna happen and will happen. And that's what water quality training is. TMDL and Clean Water Act need persons to be involved. People you can all get in on it. I recommend it. I know better than anybody that state water pollution programs depend on what the citizens call for. I mean, here in Tennessee, we are fighting for our wetlands lives. And it's because the development community wants to roll back wetlands protection to the Sackett decision. And we just have to get the public to turn out and say, no, here's why wetlands are important, and we'll have your political hide on a wall. And so far we've not been successful to do that. Public has a role in all of water quality, particularly in TMDLs. I think that gets me too. It's just a list of all Tennessee's TMDLs. Every state has a list like this on their website. We've written TMDLs. We saw the dioxin number before. We've written TMDLs in these in this list of streams. Okay, this is the end. I think I'm going over my time, but and I'll apologize. I have an overly simplified example of a TMDL, and if anybody wants to see it, I'll do it some other time.
That was excellent, Paul. You want to stop sharing your screen in case anybody's got any questions? We can do it together.
Okay, I'll push this red button. And here we are. We're back together.
Well, thank you very much. Does anybody have any last questions for Paul?
No, but I wanted to say thank you, and that's as good a rundown through a complicated topic as I've seen. So thank you, Paul. We still have problems in Illinois, but that was a very good presentation.
Well, Jennifer Network is doing such a good job. Their guidance document is the best guidance document on the Clean Water Act that's ever been written. All you folks with Sierra are doing good, important work. When I was fired from Tennessee in 2012 when the Republicans came in. And as soon as I was fired, Sierra Club, who wasn't too sure that I was okay when I was water director, all of a sudden, because I was fired, I was okay. So they invited me to be part of the group, and I'm proud to be. I've got a Sierra Club shirt, and I don't wear it so often, but when I do, I'm proud to have it on. I contribute nationally, I contribute statewide. So you guys are doing good and important work. Keep it up.